In early May, 6 Palestine Action activists were found guilty of criminal damage in connection with a raid on an Elbit Systems plant near Bristol on the 6th of August 2024. Now that stringent reporting restrictions have been lifted, we can reveal that the convicted activists face the possibility of being sentenced as terrorists despite being convicted of criminal charges. At sentencing, the judge could add a terrorism connection to their convictions, which could aggravate their sentences, a fact that was kept secret from the jury. We can also now report that prior to the initial trial, the judge had ruled to remove the defence of lawful excuse on the charge of criminal damage, which meant that the activists could not argue that the damage they caused was legally justified to prevent greater crimes being committed by Israel's military in Gaza. He also forbade the defence from reminding the jury about the principle of jury equity, the right of jurors to acquit on conscience. Through all of this, the media were barred from reporting much of what was unfolding in the courtroom. MEE speaks to acquitted activists Zoe Rogers and Jordan Devlin about their experiences of the proceedings as their co-defendants, Kamio, Corner, Rajwani and Head, await the possibility of being sentenced as terrorists. Jordan and Zoe, thank you so much for joining us at MEE. Much about this trial has been kept secret from the public through stringent reporting restrictions and hidden from the jury. During the retrial, the judge doubled down on restrictions by severely limiting what could be said in court by the defence. Could you outline what these restrictions were?
I should probably start by saying that even before these restrictions were put in place, before the trial started, our right to a fair trial was revoked, essentially. But essentially what happened is the judge he proposed an order directed towards the barristers' closing speeches, in which he made about 16 points about what couldn't be said, and that included points of law that he decided needed to be hidden from the jury, such as jury equity and the fact that the judge cannot direct the jury to convict. But beyond hiding the law from the jury, the goal of that order was to essentially silence our barristers, to make sure that they were not able to fairly represent us. And the judge himself admitted that this was something he'd never done before. Our barristers stood up and said this was something they'd never seen before. Even the prosecution was confused, and our barristers themselves said in court that they felt like they were being intimidated.
So the judge has also ruled that we're not allowed to talk about anything to do with the history of the Middle East, anything to do with the factory that we're inside, what it does, and what these drones do. So he's saying this will emotionally influence the jury to make a perverse decision. And the other things are like anything that he has made a ruling on in the absence of the jury, we're not allowed to tell them. We're not allowed to tell them that we had been on remand for 18 months and, that we were even arrested as terrorists.
And you were barred from talking about your motivations for going into the factory and destroying weapons. How did it make you feel not being able to communicate that to a jury?
Well, it was really frustrating. And especially because this jury had the ability to sentence more convict us of terrorism, although they didn't know. So, of course, all I wanted to say was I acted in line with UK law, I acted in line with international law, and I was justified in doing what I did to try and stop the supply of weapons to Israel. But it wasn't surprising that they were ruled out, because this is what the UK has been doing for decades now, routinely ruling out defences for if you do anything to do with Palestine, anything to do with trying to stop climate change, and it's effectively created a two-tier legal system, despite the fact there's been no actual change in legislation.
So both of you and 3 of your co-defendants chose to dispense with your legal representation and deliver your own closing speeches. Can you explain why you took this decision?
Our barristers were absolutely choked. There's such a limit on what they could say, at risk of ruining their careers that they've worked hard to keep. And things like the judge proceeding with contempt of court for Rajiv Menon, that's the first time in history that a judge or a barrister has been given contempt of court for the contents of their closing speech, which is absolutely ridiculous considering this so-called line that was crossed is something that every barrister in the UK has used at some point, suggesting that a jury can refuse to convict on moral grounds. And the judge arbitrarily takes that to mean that we're defying, inviting the jury to ignore the judge's rulings. He's a high court judge and he can kind of just do whatever he wants, and that's a scary level of power. And it's got me seriously questioning whether we should have these positions of power if they're being abused.
Yeah, the effect of what Judge Johnson did to Rajiv, and I'm sure this was the intended effect, was to silence our barristers, like many other decisions he made throughout the trial. And it had that effect in the first trial. Our barristers actually allowed the judge to read their speeches, cut copious amounts out of their speeches. My barrister in the first trial didn't even defend me on the charge of criminal damage. So I was forced to represent myself in the second trial because her career and even her freedom may have been put at risk if she was to give her own speech. That being said, it was very difficult because it wasn't clear what exactly we could and couldn't say. There was a climate of fear around our speeches. Mm-hmm. We all avoided saying the word genocide in our evidence because we thought that would be contempt. And so when it came to writing my speech, even though I'd written it a week before, even an hour up to giving it, I was cutting bits out to avoid contempt. And several of us had actually packed prison bags in case we were sent to prison for our speeches.
And you were both held on remand during the first trial for around 18 months, so throughout the duration of the initial trial. Could you describe what that experience was like? What were your detention conditions like, and how did this impact your ability to follow court proceedings?
The actual cells, the disgusting for us, these wooden benches that haven't been cleaned since they've been installed, but thick build-up of grime where beetles are actually burrowing into in the grooves. So there's one day in particular I lifted out 5 beetles from the benches I was on. Again, absolute disgrace for us to allow that as a society. And in terms of affecting our trial, whenever I can't get a bowl or a cup or a spoon or a kettle to make my breakfast in the morning, how do you expect me to give my best evidence? Whenever I'm laying on this hard bench after not being able to sleep all night because there's people screaming on the wing till 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm not going to be performing well at all.
Yeah, I think I don't think it's possible to have a fair trial if you're in custody. Your access to legal materials, although prison is supposed to provide it, is basically non-existent. Your contact with your solicitor is minimal. You're not able to collect evidence in your defence. In our case, we weren't able to see a lot of the evidence until our trial. And that just happens across the board to all prisoners. I think it was slightly exacerbated in our case due to some decisions made by the judge. He really did not want to allow us to talk to our barristers. And we had issues with me and my co-defendants not being able to eat during the trial, which affected my ability to give evidence. So yeah, that was just one way in which we didn't receive a fair trial.
And what do you remember about the raid in August 2024? Could you describe what weapons and equipment you found and damaged on the factory floor?
So we found drones that are used to kill people in Gaza, and we know that because we know that this factory has export licenses, and there is evidence of shipments just 2 months after our action to Haifa, Israel. But the particular drones we found included Thor drones, which they can carry anything, I think, up to 8 kilograms. They're very easily modifiable to carry different kinds of weapons, but we know that they are used to drop grenades and also to shoot square pellets, which, when shot into a body, bounce around inside, ripping apart multiple organs at a time. This is really devastating in children because of the size of children's organs. And we also found a different kind of drone, which is potentially a surveillance drone, and surveillance drones work with AI to pick out targets. Or it could have been one of the drones that go around playing sounds, such as sounds of women and children crying and screaming for help to lure people out into the open. But we're not entirely sure what that drone was because Elbit won't tell us what was in the factory. They haven't produced a list of damaged equipment. Their whole role in this trial has been hiding evidence rather than producing evidence.
Do you think that?
I think that's the important part of targeting this place in particular. It's the research and development hub in the UK. So this is where they're trying to make these drones more efficient. Taking out their computers, taking out these drones in the development stage is extremely costly to Elbit. And even things like we're targeting their computers as well there. They could be uploading updates to the ones that are already in Israel. So that's like an immediate effect of stopping them being as efficient, and possibly, you know, they still have bugs that need to be ironed out. And to be honest, anything that is a cost to Elbit is going to save lives. You know, that's the bottom line.
And during the trial, the court heard allegations regarding the conduct of the security guards. Could you describe your interactions with them?
Yeah. The security from the get-go, like the first time they come into the picture is when they're attacking us. So the first one I saw was Patrick Luke came in, and then I heard Lottie screaming. So that's the point I turn around. I see this black dressed figure standing over her, and then we all rush to help. So Lottie's laying on the floor behind these, dividers, and there's really like a blood curdling scream of horror. And the CCTV where that happened disappeared. No one's really investigated why it wasn't recording. Then this other security guard, Angelo Volante, attacked me and Zoe, barges into me, kicks me, drags Zoe along the ground, hits me with a sledgehammer. Then we move to another area.
Come, small unit.
Turns off his body camera, by the way. Rubs up against me to do that. Bites towards my neck with like a real like kind of barking sound or grunt. Kicks me again. I catch his leg. He hits the inside of my elbow there, which ended up with a massive bruise the whole way up my arm. It was like completely black. And I had to go to hospital to just see if there's a fracture in there or like how serious it was. The guy hit me in the face with the metal end of a sledgehammer there, so I've like cut in my eyebrow, black eye, swollen cheekbone. And later he choked me out threatened the other girls with a sledgehammer. He hit me in the throat with a sledgehammer as well.
Could you describe what happened when you were arrested and directly after?
So we were arrested for terrorism, taken to Hammersmith police station, which is a police station specifically for people who are being held as attacked prisoners. And the way the Terrorism Act works is essentially to allow people's human rights to be revoked. So our treatment was pretty bad. We were held incommunicado for almost 2 weeks, kept in a cell with the lights on 24/7, and taken out for frequent interrogation, some of them even in the middle of the night. And UN experts said later that our treatment may have amounted to an enforced disappearance. And that treatment transferred over to prison. We were also treated like terrorists with all of the human rights abuses that involves.
And moving on to that, now that reporting restrictions have been lifted, we can report that the judge could potentially find a terrorism connection when sentencing your co-defendants on criminal damage charges. Could you explain what this might mean for them?
Yeah, it's seriously a scary thing. Whenever they say you might be sentenced as terrorist, and let's say he only adds on 1 year to the sentence, what that actually means is you're going from time served. We've already done, look, by the time the sentencing comes around, they'll have done a 4-year sentence, right? So the 1 year extra brings it up to, let's say, 5 years, and then you'll have to do the 2/3 of that rather than 1/3 or 40%, because this depends on how full the prisons are. 2/3 of that afterwards, you have to appease a parole board, and notoriously they're not very friendly to the terrorism label. And my co-defendants would have to rescind their beliefs that what they did was the right thing, or there was any sort of moral justification. That all has to be flatly denied. And after their sentence term finishes, whether it's going to be at least 5 years, but it could be more, really. After that, they will be on notice for 15, could be up to 30 years, I believe, to the police. So they'll have to provide the police with every relationship they've ever been in, every time they change their phone number, new device, bank details, every time they move, anything kind of significant like that. And if they mess up, let's say they get caught by the police and they're holding someone else's phone, that could potentially lead to them doing another 5 years in prison. So it's so much more serious than another couple of months on your sentence.
Do you have anything to add?
Just that if you happen to be Muslim, there's even more severe ramifications. For example, you have to go to a specific mosque picked out by the police. You're not allowed to talk to anybody at that mosque. I'm generally concerned for the welfare of anybody who's in prison. It's not a safe environment at all. The medical neglect is beyond belief. They will always have our support. But yeah, prison isn't a place for anyone to be.
And has your experience over the last year changed you, and how?
I think I'm getting back to my old self. I always knew that the British government wasn't batting 1,000, so there's nothing shockingly new there. I'm obviously going to be advocating for my friends whenever sentencing happens on the 12th of June. For now, I'm just trying to get as many people down there as possible, from maybe 10 in the morning to 5 in the evening when the sentencing's going to happen. But after the world has witnessed what this judge is willing to do to or sort of democratic freedoms?
Yeah, it definitely has informed my worldview a bit. It's become very clear to me that there's no separation of powers in this country, and show me just how vile terrorism law in this country is and how it needs to be abolished. And it definitely is going to affect what I choose to do with my life now. This is something that I think everyone should be angry about, and I think it's important that we all do what we can to protect our democratic freedoms, because if we don't have those, all of our other rights can potentially be taken away from us.
Do you have any regrets about what you did?
I'll never regret signing up for that action. Obviously, things could be tweaked, that, you know, if we had a time machine, but ultimately we went there with the intention of saving lives, and that's what we did. You know, we stopped these weapons from getting to Israel, and we shut down production for an amount of time, and that will directly equate to somebody making it out alive who might have otherwise had no chance. How could you possibly regret that?
Yeah, I won't ever regret it. Despite having gone through 2 trials, having spent 18 months in prison, which is 3 times the legal limit, I will always want to do the right thing, and I believe that is what I did.
Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.